You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review, and I'm very grateful that you are, and I'm very grateful that we have a guest today that I know so many people enjoy hearing from, and that he's got a lot of new things to offer. It's Dan Mall. Dan, welcome.
Lou, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Well, and a lot of the pleasure, as you were saying sort of pre-shows, you can kind of take a breath now because your book is like out of your hands.
Oh my gosh, it's such a sigh of relief. I've been working on it for such a long time. As you know, books are a labor of love, and it's nice to be done. It's nice to know that like other people will be able to read it now soon.
Well, and if you're listening and wondering what the hell we're talking about, Dan's book, Design That Scales, Creating a Sustainable Design System Practice, will be out very soon. Like, I believe it might be on pre-order as soon as Monday, which is like, what is that, October 2nd or thereabouts. Yeah, we are so happy, Dan. Like design systems, not exactly something that's brand new, but something that is maybe ready for a new look. Not a new look in the sense of we wanted to make it look better, but a new look in terms of looking at it from maybe a sort of a different perspective, one where we now have the benefit of a number of years and people working in them, thinking about them, writing about them, having conferences about them, that we can take this sort of different view, which you're doing, and Design That Scales. Can you bottom line the unique lens that you're taking a look at design systems through?
Yeah, totally. So as you said, design systems are old. They're as old as humans are. If you think about cave paintings, that was a form of design systems, thousands and thousands of years ago. And in the last 10 years also, we've had sort of a revival in how digital work gets done. And design systems are a big part of that, especially at large enterprises that work at scale. And so, even though it's a thing that I think humans are intrinsically familiar with, just from living on the earth, the way that we work in digital is kind of new, and is exciting and has a lot of important ramifications for the way that people are doing design work and IA work and engineering work and content work and all the things that make the digital products that we interact with every day work, from all the Google apps that you might use or the Microsoft apps, or you name the big company whose apps you use, likely a design system has either entered their vocabulary or has been existing for a long time. So, what I wanted to take a look at in this book is just kind of debunk a couple of myths about how these things go, and also inform people to go, it's beneficial, it's accessible, it's important, and you can do it. And I think a lot of people learn design systems by doing them poorly and kind of learn from failure, which is a great way to learn. But maybe I can help people learn from success, a little bit more than learning from failure on their own. So that's really what the book is about.
So is that failure rooted in seeing design systems as like sort of in sets of instructions, something that's almost algorithmic? You set it up and people follow it, and it just works that way.
Yeah, totally. It's because, those two words, design and systems, are both very broad words. So when you put them together, it basically applies to just about anything. Design is something that you intend to render, and a system is a thing that is connected. So it's like, that doesn't really give us anything to hang our hat on. And in the book, part of what I cover is there are actually 7 different kinds of design systems that we can identify, even in digital work. So just talking about the same thing is hard. So I think we and part of the promises of good design systems is a shared vocabulary. And if we can't even define the thing together, how can we have a shared vocabulary about what it is and how we use it and things like that? So, I think it deserves a breakdown of going like, here are all the things that qualify as a design system, and which one are we going to talk about, or which one are you going to use at your company or on your team? And it could be any one of those things, but aligning on it is the first step.
So how do you get that alignment to happen? You need to be doing that before you say, all right, we're ready to start creating design systems? Or is it more typical, like you've already taken maybe some years of steps in that direction with mixed levels of success, and then you're having to pop your head back out and say, what the hell's going on?
Right. My favorite quote about design systems. I wish I could take credit for it. I wish I had my own version, but I credit Lauren Loprette. She said, "Design systems are culture change disguised as a UI kit."
Ooh, that's
So juicy,
great.
right? It's so good.
That is great.
And that's why they're so difficult, because they are culture change. That's why, design systems, if you think about them as a project or as a library or as a set of guidelines and tools, yeah, I mean, it takes you a couple days to make one, a couple of weeks to make one, and then you set the rules and people follow it. But as any organization can tell and know, that you can't just give people rules and expect them to follow it. The culture has to exist for people to be able to do that successfully. And a lot of the cultures don't have the ways for people to go, I'm going to use this code library or these design files or this process or this structure or this service. They don't have the culture that supports that. So that's why it doesn't take, it doesn't catch. And so those are the things that I think are really important in terms of design systems. Is you have to set the culture. You have to set the table for the culture to be able to be receptive to those ideas in the first place. And if you do that too soon, then they don't take. A lot of the design system teams that I work with and have consulted with, most of them who have done it successfully are out on their third or fourth try. And most of it's not because the design was too hard, the React code was too difficult to write, or anything like that. It was because the organization wasn't ready to adopt it from a cultural standpoint. And so, part of what I cover in the book is how do you set the table for that? How do you get people to be more open to a different way of collaborating? How do you get the roles set up? How do you pay people well enough? What roles do you need to have, in order for those things to take? So all of those things contribute to design system success. It's not just as easy. I wish it was. It's not as easy as you make the thing and people use the thing. It's a lot more involved than that.
Oh, well, okay. So does it even go further back? Like, maybe this is taking it a little too kind of early on in how people work in a large organization, but to the point of I happen to be a designer or a writer or some other person that's creating digital content in an enterprise, let's say. Does it even occur to me to think that there's a version of this that may have already been thought through, or that there is some guidance that I can draw on? I mean, do you see that? People don't even think that to think about it, a potential design system out there in their own organization.
Yeah, I think that when people think about it is when they experience pain. It's when they realize, why am I doing this the fifth time, over and over again, the eighth time, the 12th time? Didn't I just do this? And a lot of the designers that I talk to and engineers that I talk to, they say things like, I've built my whole career off of designing forms and tables. I've been a designer 7 years, and for the last 7 years, I've just designed forms and tables. And so there's a comfort in that. There's also a boredom and a pain in that, especially when it's not systematized. And then there's also a fear in replacing that too. So if somebody came up to somebody and said, "Hey, you no longer have to design or build forms and tables again," there's equal parts, hallelujah, that saves me time. And then also, but wait a minute, is my job in jeopardy now? Because that's what I've been paid to do for the last X amount of years. So again, that's all the cultural stuff that goes along with it. Is we can't just take jobs away from people and then not replace them with something else. We just unemployed them. We just laid them off essentially, without them having something else to do. So we also, as organizations and teams, we have to figure out, well, what do we replace that stuff with? How can we replace it with higher order, higher value activities, like thinking through user needs more deeply, or caring more about accessibility, or documenting things more thoroughly, or things that people have wanted to do for a long time that we've never had time for. Well, now we have the time to do it. But again, we have to be culturally set up to be able to use our time that way. Our Scrum teams have to change. Our Agile methodologies have to change. The way that we measure our work, whether or not it's successful, those things have to change. And if we're not prepared to change those things with it, design systems usually have a tough time catching.
I find that a lot of people who well, let me put it to you this way. In situations like this, where suddenly there's a design system, or maybe we're starting to use very powerful AI tools, or whatever it might be, that can be perceived as a threat to people in certain roles. The problem is often not that they're going to lose a certain amount of work or a certain kind of work that they've been doing for a long time. I think a lot of them get that it's okay to move on. What I think is often the hardest part for them psychologically is just the increase in uncertainty. So, do you find in those sort of early situations where you're standing up a design system, or at least you're trying to stand up a successful one where there wasn't, that you have to sort of give those people some new kind of certainty or maintain some kind of certainty that didn't come from designing forms over and over again? Like, do you have to give them something else?
100%. That's why whenever I teach design systems, I teach two things. One is the nuts and bolts of it, and I teach that through a thing called piloting. There's a whole big chapter in the book about piloting and how you might use a product on your roadmap as a pilot to grow your design system and continuing doing that. So, that I think is probably obvious to people. In order to work on a design system, you got to know how to make a design system. But then the other part that I can't not teach is the process and the workflow stuff, because that's the other part. That's the other side of the coin. And part of that comes all the stuff that you're talking about is the certainty that people felt before. What we have to get them to realize is the certainty wasn't in designing forms, designing tables or headers or things like that, even though that's the illusion. The illusion was like that piece was certain, and now that's going away. So a lot of what I talk about is what keeps people motivated. And there's three things. It's autonomy, purpose, and mastery. And so if we can continue to deliver those three things to people, then whether the mastery comes in designing forms or designing something new, a new interaction, or designing a new service or a new business unit, that same skill of designing that thing can be applied to something else. And the certainty can come from the continuity of that. I'm still using my same design skills. I'm just applying it somewhere else.
You're still a designer, damn it.
Exactly. That's right. And I think people don't realize that, or at least initially, I'm not designing forms anymore. Am I a designer? Am I even a designer anymore? And I think there's an identity piece of that we have to address to say, yeah, you're still a designer. You're still an engineer. You're still an information architect. You're still a content person. We're just pointing it in a different direction now.
So let's talk a little bit about the kinds of organizations that are more likely to take your advice. Like what kind of cultural signs or markers do you look for when, let's say, you're working with a client that makes you feel like, oh, these folks are going to be more likely to succeed than some others?
The biggest thing, and I think this works at a macro and a micro scale. So this is true when I'm teaching a new designer who's maybe a career switcher or somebody who is a student. It's the same thing that I see in big organizations when I'm working with a team. It's open-mindedness, open-mindedness and curiosity. Those are things that to me are welcome signs for change. And the flip side is true too. Organizations or people who are like, I already know how to do this. I'm closed minded. I don't know. I don't need a new way to do this. I'm like, well, it's going to be tough to adopt a design system if you've already got it set, because there's always going to be some amount of change that you have to adopt in order to do that. So a lot of the teams, as I mentioned, a lot of teams that I work with that have successful design system practices are on their third or fourth try. And a lot of the open-mindedness, unfortunately, comes from, well, we thought we knew what we were doing the first two times, and clearly we didn't. So I don't know. We're open to whatever now. We feel pain, and we thought that we could solve it before. And usually that pain comes in the language of business. It usually comes in the form of money. We're losing a ton of money. We're being inefficient. We're just not communicating the way our competitors are eating our lunch. So we need something different. And that's what a design system is. It's something different. And in order to adopt something different, you have to have the mindset to go, okay, I'm receptive to something new now.
So you're not seeing necessarily organizations that haven't been through pain succeed. Like rather than saying, well, we're learning the hard way. I'm wondering if you see organizations that say, well, we're just more we just want to be cautious about risk. We know things could go wrong, and we want to nip that in the bud. Do you see that happening much?
Yeah, I mean, I can recall a story of an organization that I work with that they didn't feel much pain. They were like, I think we're doing okay. And that was one of the organizations that a design system took a long time to take there. Because I think they didn't have the motivation to do something different.
Mm.
Sometimes that comes from pain. I think that's one of the strongest signals. Other time it just comes from the desire to innovate, the desire to do something differently or better or something like that. And at that organization, it just wasn't strong enough. They saw themselves, they were the number one competitor in their own space and in their own industry. And if I harken back to, I think it was a campaign from the 80s for Hertz Rent-A-Car, when they were number two behind, I forget who they were, their slogan was "Number two tries harder."
Yeah, actually, I think it was Avis who was competing against Hertz.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
it's such a great slogan. We try harder because we're number two. We have something to prove. And I think, unfortunately, organizations that are in that number one spot, they can rest on their laurels a little bit more because they don't, they're the ones to be unseated. And so they don't necessarily have to do anything to change unless their competitors sort of force that.
Yeah, and yet we see that again and again. I'm just holding my phone up here and remembering the Motorola I once had.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is such a great topic, and I've done a couple hundred podcasts, and I know that my brain is swimming when I pause, and I'm not quite sure how to ask the next question because I'm still thinking about what you said last time. So you know what? I'm going to take I'm because I'm the host, I can decide we're going to take a quick break. We're going to do that. But after the break, I want to kind of get more into culture and governance in particular, because I feel like, that's something that's so critical here about how decisions get made, who even decides to have a design system or rethink it and so forth. We're going to get into that after the break, and I'm going to let some more of these ideas settle in during the break. Everyone, you're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. We'll be right back with Dan Mall. What are you doing on November 29th? I'm asking because I know what I'll be doing, and I hope you'll be part of it. Our fourth conference of the year is Design in Product. It'll be the second edition. I'm programming it with Christian Crumlish, and we are really excited. We just launched the program. It's got two keynoters, John Cutler and Ellen Chisa. Can't really do better than that if you're interested in the intersection of design and product. And we've got a great program. Asia Ho, Ian McMaster, Ihan Cheng, Lauren Catan, Julie Kim, Chloe Sharp, Alfred Kahn, and Sean Shen are fleshing out that program. And we are going to delve into the topics that are bedeviling designers who are trying to work in product settings or with product people. The themes that we're exploring are alignment and partnering, setting and defending priorities, influencing and politicking. If you can do those, designers, you can succeed in a product and organization or working with product people. You want to be there. It's a virtual conference on November 29th. See you then. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. And Dan Mall and I are talking about his new book, Design That Scales. And it's coming out in October, November 2023. I guess you might be listening to this after then. Hope you'll pick up a copy. And just before the break, my brain was swimming with all the things that Dan was saying and swimming toward governance. We're talking about bringing in new ways of looking at design systems. We're also talking about not only deciding to do that, but how to pay for it, who pays for it, who does it, how does it get organized. That's a lot of cultural issues, a lot of political issues. That's kind of, in a way, a lot of what you're addressing in the book that hasn't been addressed before when people talk about design systems.
Yeah, it's a timely concept too. I think I've been doing design systems since like 2012, 2013, around there. Which is kind of early-ish days, as this was emerging in our industry as a digital tool. And I remember a lot of the clients that I'd worked with and teams that I'd worked with, they were asking for help building or designing a design system. If you fast forward to now, I almost never get an inquiry from a client or a customer saying, like, help us build a design system. Almost everyone has one. Almost all of the inquiries now are like, how should we govern this? Like, what should our contribution guidelines look like? So a lot of the industry seems like people have, starting to take on design systems. They built their own, but there's still some problems with it in that, like, people don't know what to do with it as a product. So how does it govern? Who are the roles that involved in it? Who does what and when do they do it? So eager to get into that topic for sure.
Okay, so and well, also we have to roll in another aspect, which I think it's amazing we haven't used this word yet, because I think it pretty much animates a lot of your thinking, which is sustainability.
Yeah, no doubt. I know when we had I think, Lou, when you and I talked about the book very early on, we talked a lot about the design systems being practices, and that's in the subtitle of the book. It's creating a sustainable design system practice. And, those words go together well, because it's not enough to just create a design system. It's not enough to just create a design system practice. The full fruition of all this is it's got to be sustainable, because there's such a big effort to create a design system and get it ingrained into your organization. If it lasts you a year, it wasn't worth the effort.
Right.
Good design, if you look at material design, I think they're going on year 10 or 12 or something like that.
Wow.
And that's a great example of a sustainable practice. That doesn't mean they don't have problems or challenges, just like everybody else does, but it's been there for a while, and it powers a lot of the work that Google does. So, I think design systems need to be created in order to last. Otherwise, if they don't last, they're just a short-lived project, and like, you might not want to spend all the effort to do it.
So what does governance look like in with the idea that it's going to be sustainable? I mean, you need governance to be sustainable. Where does it typically begin? Are you seeing it emanate out of a design organization or a developer organization or engineering or somewhere else? Is there a pattern?
So Rosenfeld Media cross-sell unlocked here. I'm gonna cite Lisa Welchman's book, which is a great Managing Chaos: Digital Governance by Design. I learned a ton about governance from that book. So big hat tip there. Governance is basically clarifying roles and responsibilities for collaborative teams. That's the way that Lisa kind of talks about governance. And so, part of the way I say that is like, who does what when. That's what a lot of people want to know with design systems. Typically, how design system teams work, there's a couple of different models for this. In general, there's usually a bunch of product teams that are cross-disciplinary, that are working on products or features of a company, of certain products. And then there's usually a central design system team that works in a number of different ways, that either serves those product teams, works in collaboration with them, is made up of maybe a federation of people that cycle in and out. So there's different models around that. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see around governance is that people are in the wrong seats. So it's harder. It's like playing in a band where the guitar player is playing the drums. And it's like, I mean, wouldn't it be a little bit better if the guitar player was actually playing the guitar in this one? Like, we might make better music this way. Like, it would be interesting the other way, but seems like there's probably an easier way to do it. And so I find that to be true in design systems a lot, is that I think that organizations think that the design system team's job is to create a bunch of components, and then the product team's job is to use those components. And that's what will make it consistent and efficient and all that stuff. That's backwards. And that's a lot of what I write about in the book. That's, to me, is like one of the biggest things that people get wrong, is it should go the other way around. The product team's job is to actually create components. And then the design system team's job is to take their components out of the products that they make, and then touch them up, abstract them, extract them for scale.
Mm-hmm.
Because the product team's job is not to work at scale. It's the design system team's job, because they're not the ones creating components. They have the time, the availability, the interest, and the skills to look at it and say, we know how to systematize this thing that you made for this one instance over here. We know how to systematize it in a way that 6 other teams can use that next month.
Well, it's like, so, you've got, like, in an enterprise, you have multiple products, not multiple designs, right? Or you shouldn't have multiple designs. Yeah, that makes total sense.
But that's how teams work, though, is they treat it like different designs, because they're so siloed. Like, one, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and that's how you end up with all this digital, design debt and technical debt, is because something that's happened over here in the org has no effect or impact on something that's happening over here on the org. So there's just a lot of duplication by accident, and so the design system team's job is to look across the whole org and say, you know what, there's something's happening over there. I think you all should know about this thing, and connect those, because that's what a system is. It's just connecting things together. And that's what the team's job is to do.
Well, so that whole, I think you should know about this, seems really critical. Like the design systems team, in a way, needs to feed back to the product people and say, hey, maybe before you start thinking about this new functionality, you see if we've already got it. And I know you have a bunch of different models for governance that you cover in the book that folks like Nathan Curtis and Gina have come up with. Is that really speaking to like just different ways that kind of back and forth, that input output between design and product should be working? And are you fairly agnostic about them, or?
I think it is a very dependent thing on the organization's culture. So a lot of the way that I think about design systems is that you want to follow the trails that have already worked.
Mm-hmm.
If your organization has, for example, an open source culture, well, that's a good model to follow for how your design system can be successful. Follow that model. There are things that IT will just say no to. There are things that legal will just say no to. So, and a lot of those two examples in particular, what they look for generally is precedent. They go, have we done this before? If we've done it before, then we could probably do it again. If this is the first time that we've done something, it's too risky for us. Right. Both of those groups, generally legal, compliance, IT, are usually like, if we're doing it for the first time, we need to look into this.
Mm-hmm.
What I recommend to teams when they're paving the design system path is like, just follow the pathways that have already been paved. Like go down those paths, because it's going to be an easier path. And so I very much resonate with those models that Nathan Curtis and Gina Ann have talked about in creating either federated models of contribution and of participation, or cyclical models. I think that the open source model is a really good model as well. If you look at a company like WordPress, it has a lot of different factions. There are people that work there full time that get paid to work on WordPress. There are people who don't work there full time that also work on WordPress full time with their jobs funding that. There are people who are consumers of it that will never contribute back to the WordPress code base. There's lots of different factions that are involved in that entire ecosystem. And so an organization needs to find an ecosystem that, again, will be sustainable for them. And it's not always the same model. Some design system teams are made up purely of volunteers. Some design system teams are fully funded for the next 3 years. Those are very different cultures. And so I think that for a design system to take, it has to work with the cultural model.
So you think that those different models are really more a function of culture and not maturity?
Absolutely. Yes. I think I've seen the different models across different levels of maturity work fine. So I think it's less linear in terms of how it lines up with design maturity or design system maturity than it does like what can the culture tolerate or not.
Now, one last question. So you've been doing this for a long time. What would you say? I'm really interested to get a sense of like how people who are decision makers who are usually like the most senior people who even are aware of design systems in an enterprise, how they think about design systems. How has that evolved in the last 5 or 10 years? And how would you say thinking about design systems has evolved for ICs in the last 5 or 10 years? And have they been keeping up with each other?
Yeah, thank you for this question. What is equally interesting to me is how they haven't evolved. So I'll touch on both of those things. They have evolved in terms of when I first started working on design systems, a lot of teams that I would work with, the need generally came from the ICs, the individual contributors, the designers and the engineers on the ground, working on the products, in Figma, in Sketch, in React, in Angular, writing the code. And a lot of what they would bring me and my teams in for is like, can you help us convince the higher ups that we need this here? Right. So we would come in and help pitch and bring in our ROI slides and all that kind of stuff. Nowadays, almost every executive I meet with is like, yeah, I've heard of a design system. I understand its benefits. Right. So that has changed. That has evolved a lot. Like I think the industry has done a good job of education. As you mentioned before, there's a lot more podcasts and conferences and books and materials and all sorts of stuff. People talking about design systems and evangelizing their benefit. What hasn't changed is that design systems squarely sit, from what I've seen, at a number 3 priority, never higher. So there's always at least two things that are more important to do on the company's roadmap than design systems. And that's always the hurdle. The hurdle is like the designers and engineers that bring me in and say like, can you convince our leadership that this should be number 1 priority? Like, no, nope. because I think that they're making, the leadership is generally making the right decision. They are prioritizing the products and features that bring their customers value. I think that's a good call for an organization to do. So the trick and the challenge is, how do we essentially get a design system as a byproduct of doing that work, as opposed to raising it in priority and deprioritizing product work that actually makes our company money or gets us customers or anything like that? Is we have to do those things together. And that's really the crux of the book, Design That Scales, is like, we're not trying to co-opt that number one priority spot. We're trying to say, yeah, we should keep working on features, but if we work on features, can we get a design system out of that? And that is the thing, that if you can do that, then it's at no risk to any stakeholder. Nobody gets deprioritized. Nothing gets moved around in that way. We're still helping our customers, which is our number one priority. And then we get this amazing tool as a benefit. Now, of course, easier said than done, which is why I wrote a book about it.
Fantastic. And actually, before we get away from evolution, over the last few years, I do want to acknowledge that you've gone through some in your work. You were doing Super Friendly for a number of years. A lot of people knew your work at doing design systems consulting. And now you've stepped away from that, and you're doing the Design Systems University. You want to talk about that for a moment?
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. That has evolved as the industry has evolved. So one thing that I learned in running an agency and selling design system consulting and services to organizations is that the work that we did, although good, and I think, at the best of the industry, among the best, sometimes they just didn't take root. And one of the things that I learned from that was, like, it was because it's trying to be transplanted from the outside. We, my team would build the design system and design the design system, and we would collaborate, we would co-create, and then we would try to transplant it from our environment into theirs. And we would train, and we would do workshops, and we would do town halls, and we would do all this stuff, but it was still a foreign object. Mm-hmm. And what I realized was, and I switched the model of my agency, for the last few years of it, was that the more I can educate the in-house team about how to do this on their own, how to grow it from the inside, the more it just took root as a sustainable practice. And so the next evolution of that was like, I think I'm done doing agency work, because I don't think that's the right thing to sell to people. I think that what I should sell them is actually the ability to educate them on how to do it on their own. Because if the goal is sustainable design system practices, I just didn't have good success doing that from the outside as much as I have, like, let me just work with your team to grow it from the inside. It's your thing. We're not making it and then giving it to you. It's not a gift. It's not a deliverable at that point. It's yours, and I can give you some support in how to do that. And so, my journey has kind of led me to, I think the education route when it comes to design systems is much more fruitful than, we pay us for a deliverable and then good luck taking it over, and we'll see you in 6 months.
Well, speaking of gifts and speaking of education, I think you have a gift for our listeners to wrap up the podcast. What do you got for us?
Yes, and along the same lines, my friend Ritesh Gupta has created the Useful School, and it's such a wonderful initiative. It's usefulschool.com, and it's essentially practical classes for people of color. What is so awesome about it is it's a pay what you wish model. So Ritesh has a really great heart for wanting more and more people to get into design and engineering and like these really great fields that we all work in. And not a lot of people can afford that all the time, especially the people that get counted out are people who are generally marginalized in other areas of life. People of color, women, trans folk, like all sorts of people who generally don't get that opportunity. So Ritesh has been awesome in just opening up that opportunity. He's got a ton of classes about, product design, branding. He's expanded, I think, this year to things like financial wellness and decolonizing design and things like that really round out a design education, things that I wish I had done and gotten in design school that I had to learn, the hard way. And so, I would love everyone, as many people as possible, to support what Ritesh is doing with Useful School. You can make financial contributions. You can tweet about it and share it, with folks. You can recommend people to it. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and I'm a guest speaker in a bunch of his classes. He has a bunch of other of those too, and I think it's just a great thing that he's doing.
Sounds like he's given a lot, and so are you. And thank you for giving so much of your knowledge away over the last few years, and of course, in this new book, Design That Scales, Creating a Sustainable Design System Practice. Dan, fantastic talking with you. Thanks for joining us today in the Rosenfeld Review.
Lou, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Rosenfeld Review, brought to you by Rosenfeld Media. If you like our show, please subscribe and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. I'd love it if you tell a friend to have a listen, and check out our website for over 100 podcasts with other interesting people. You'll find them all at rosenfeldreview.com.